At my wife's college reunion, the golden boy she'd always been in love with publicly tried to drag her back to his hotel. I lost my temper and put him in the hospital. The next day, she furiously slapped a black card on the table in front of me. $100 million. We're getting a divorce. Get out of the Vance family for good. I looked at the card and smiled. I'd been undercover for 3 years, playing the part of a worthless, kept husband. I had finally reached the end of my sentence. I signed the papers so fast it made her head spin. The second the money hits my account, I'm gone. She froze, clearly stunned by how easily I agreed. I didn't give her another glance. I picked up the divorce papers and the card and walked out without looking back. This time, you didn't dump me. This time, I was finally free. Chapter 1, you bastard. Don't you dare lay another finger on Blake. In the living room of the Vance family's Greenwich estate, my so-called wife, Isabella, stared at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. She was protectively shielding a slick, pampered man behind her, Blake Harding. Last night at their college reunion, this was the guy who'd gotten drunk, wrapped his arm around Isabella's waist in front of everyone, and slurred something about taking her to his hotel to relive the good old days. I didn't hold back. I broke his nose with a single punch. Now he stood there with comical tufts of cotton shoved up his nostrils, glaring at me with pure hatred. And my wife, Isabella Vance, the Ice Queen CEO of Vance Industries, was standing in front of him, defending him. Our 3-year marriage had just become a punchline. My name is Ethan Cole, and I'm an imposter. 3 years ago, I assumed the identity of a penniless orphan with the same name. I was chosen by Isabella's grandfather, the old patriarch of the Vance family, to be her husband. A classic charity case. A man who brought nothing to the table. My mission was simple. Act like a useless freeloader who was pathologically in love with Isabella, to the point where she would grow to despise me and demand a divorce. Because my real identity is the sole heir to the Cole family empire, the true, unseen king of Wall Street. My family had given me a 3-year sabbatical to experience a normal life, to find a woman who would love me for who I was, not for my fortune. Clearly, I had failed. Ethan, what are you waiting for? Apologize to Blake right now. Isabella's voice was frigid, her tone leaving no room for argument. Blake puffed out his chest, a smug sneer on his face. Izzy, forget it. Why lower yourself by arguing with a parasite? I doubt he could even afford to cover my medical bills. Watching their little performance, the last ounce of warmth I'd been feigning for 3 years evaporated. I chuckled, pulled out my phone, and right in front of them, dialed a number I hadn't touched in 3 years. Kingsley, a respectful, steady voice, answered on the other end. Mr. Cole, it is good to hear from you, sir. I need $2 million. Cash. Delivered to the Vance estate, I said. At once, sir. I hung up. The living room fell into a dead silence. Isabella and Blake were both looking at me like I was insane. $2 million? Ethan, have you lost your mind? Isabella's brow furrowed in disgust. You really think someone's going to bring you money just because you made a phone call? Blake laughed, his voice dripping with contempt. You've been living off the Van Cess for 3 years. Well, have you ever seen $2 million? I ignored them, walked over to the sofa, and poured myself a glass of water. For 3 years, my daily routine had been laundry, cooking, and cleaning, serving this family like a butler. The clothes on my back were Isabella's cast-off brands. The car I drove was a decade-old sedan on its last legs, and my monthly allowance was a pathetic $2,000. In their eyes, I was the definition of a loser. Less than 20 minutes later, the thunderous roar of a helicopter shattered the quiet of the neighborhood. The powerful downdraft from the rotors whipped the ancient oaks on the lawn into a frenzy. The color drained from Isabella and Blake's faces. They rushed to the window just in time to see a sleek, black helicopter with a subtle C logo emblazoned on its tail descend onto the perfectly manicured front lawn. 4 men in sharp black suits and sunglasses jumped out, carrying 2 large metallic cases as they marched toward the front door. The doorbell rang. Isabella turned to look at me, her expression a mixture of shock and utter confusion. I stood up and opened the door. The lead security guard bowed a full 90 degrees. Mr. Cole, the funds have arrived. With a click, he opened the cases. 2 briefcases, overflowing with stacks of crisp $100 bills, glittered under the grand chandelier of the foyer. Blake's eyes nearly bulged out of their sockets. He pointed a trembling finger at me. I walked to the cases, grabbed a thick stack of cash, and flung it at Blake's face. Is that enough for your doctor's visit? If not, there's more where that came from. The bills fluttered down like confetti, landing on Blake's stunned face. He was completely speechless. I turned to Isabella. She was just as shocked, that perpetually frozen expression of hers finally cracking to reveal something I'd never seen before. Bewilderment. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the divorce papers she'd had drawn up. Isabella, let's get a divorce. My voice was calm. She flinched as if I'd struck her. Still reeling from the helicopter and the cash, she asked reflexively, why? Why? I laughed, a bitter, self-mocking sound. Because I'm done playing this part. I uncapped a pen and signed my name with a flourish. Isn't this what you've always wanted? Well, now you have it. Her lips parted, as if she wanted to say something. But just then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, and her face went white, a flash of panic in her eyes. It was Blake, the real Blake, the one I'd put in the hospital, calling from his room. She hesitated for a second before answering, her voice unconsciously softening. Hello, Blake. How are you feeling? I'll be right there. After hanging up, the look she gave me was once again filled with the familiar coldness and disgust. The brief moment of vulnerability was gone, as if I'd imagined it. She pulled a black Amex Centurion card from her purse and tossed it on the table. There's $100 million in there. Consider it payment for the 3 years you spent as our dog. Her voice was quiet, but it shattered the last remaining bond between us. Sign the papers, take the money, and get out of this house. I never want to see you again. I looked at the black card and smiled. Finally, this was the moment I had been waiting 3 years for. I picked up the card and the signed papers and handed them to her. The second the money's in my account, I'll disappear. This time, it was Isabella's turn to be stunned. She clearly hadn't expected me to be so decisive, so utterly devoid of attachment. I couldn't be bothered to look at her complicated expression any longer. I turned to my men at the door. Kingsley, have everything that belongs to me in this house burned? Yes, sir. Without a backward glance, I walked out of the prison I had inhabited for 3 years. The air outside felt so fresh. This time, Isabella Vance, you didn't dump me. This time, Ethan Cole was finally free. Chapter 2, I stepped onto the helicopter and left the Vance estate behind. Below me, the sprawling, brightly lit mansion shrank until it was just another point of light in the suburban darkness. I leaned back against the plush leather seat and closed my eyes. 3 years of suffocating pretense vanished in an instant. Kingsley, a man in a perfectly tailored English butler's uniform with his silver hair combed back immaculately, handed me a glass of water. Welcome back, Mr. Cole. I opened my eyes and took the glass. You've had a difficult 3 years, Kingsley. Kingsley was the chief steward of the Cole family, and the only person I trusted implicitly. While I was playing the part of the pathetic husband, he was in the shadows, managing the entirety of the Cole empire and ensuring my safety. It is my honor to serve you, sir, Kingsley said with a slight bow. Where to next? I stared out at the glittering skyline of New York City rushing past. Take me to the Apex. The Apex was the most exclusive private club in the city and, naturally, one of my family's properties. Membership was by invitation only, restricted to those with a net worth of $10 billion or more. The helicopter touched down on the rooftop helipad. The club's general manager, a stunningly beautiful woman in her 40s, was already waiting with her senior staff. The moment she saw me, she hurried over, her face a mask of fawning adoration. Mr. Cole, you're finally back. We've all missed you terribly. I ignored her and strode toward the elevator. Kingsley followed, speaking to the manager without breaking stride. Have your finest suit sent to the presidential suite. Immediately. Of course. Right away. In the presidential suite, a hot bath was already drawn, the air filled with the scent of sandalwood. I ripped off the cheap t-shirt I'd worn for 3 years and tossed it into the trash. Then, I sank into the steaming water. The heat enveloped me, washing away not just the fatigue, but the grime of the last 3 years. I felt alive again. Half an hour later, I stepped out of the bathroom in a thick robe. A brand new, bespoke Armani suit was laid out on the king-size bed. Beside it sat a Patek Philippe watch. I dressed, fastened the watch, and stared at the stranger in the mirror. The man looking back was tall and sharp, his features handsome, his eyes deep and piercing. This was the real me. Ethan Cole. Sir, your accounts have been unfrozen. Here is your new phone and all your identification. Kingsley presented a silver tray to me. I picked up a new phone. As it powered on, a flood of notifications poured in, missed calls and texts from old friends and business associates. I deleted them all without a second thought, then dialed a number. Marco, I need a car. Mr. Cole? Is that really you? You're finally back on the grid. A voice burst excitedly from the other end. Marco was the owner of the biggest luxury car dealership in the tri-state area and a man who owed his success to me. Cut the crap. I want the Pagani Zonda R. Now, the Zonda R was a track-only hypercar with a global production run of less than 20. Its price tag exceeded $3 million. You got it. I'll have it sent to the Apex right away, Marco said, practically buzzing with excitement. I hung up and walked to the suite's floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city below. A river of light flowed through the concrete canyons, a galaxy of ambition and power, and I stood at its peak. Starting today, I was no longer the down-on-his-luck husband everyone could step on. I was going to make every single person who ever looked down on me pay, especially Isabella Vance. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Kingsley. Look into the Hudson Yards Gateway project that Vance Industries is bidding on. I want it. The reply was instantaneous. Yes, sir. The Gateway project was the most important undertaking for Vance Industries this year, and it was Isabella's passion project. If something went wrong, it would be a devastating blow to her company and to her personally. Isabella, you thought I was worthless? I'm going to let you watch as this worthless man reduces everything you're so proud of to ash. The game was just beginning. Chapter 3 the next morning, I woke up whenever I damn well pleased. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows, painting patterns on the plush carpet. I stretched, feeling a profound sense of relief. A life without waking up at dawn to make breakfast, without having to bow and scrape to anyone. It was good to be back. My phone rang. It was Marco. Mr. Cole, your Zonda R is parked out front of the Apex. The keys are at the front desk. Got it. I hung up, showered, and changed into a casual but expensive outfit before heading down to the club's dining room. The air was filled with the soft melody of a grand piano. Exquisite food and impeccably polite waiters defined the atmosphere of understated luxury. I took a table by the window and ordered the A5 Wagyu breakfast. I was halfway through my meal when a commotion at the entrance caught my attention. I looked up and saw Isabella and Blake Harding walking in, surrounded by a group of executives. Isabella was dressed in a pristine white Chanel power suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun. She had the same untouchable Ice Queen aura as always. Blake, standing beside her, was dressed in a flashy Versace suit, the bruises on his nose carefully concealed with makeup. He looked every bit the smug prick he was. They were clearly here for a business lunch. Of all the places in New York, I lowered my head and focused on cutting my steak, having no desire to engage with them. But it was too late. They had already spotted me. A triumphant smirk on his face, Blake wrapped an arm around Isabella's waist and steered her directly toward my table. Well, if it isn't the great Mr. Cole, eating breakfast all by your lonesome. His voice was pitched just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. Diners paused, casting curious glances my way. I looked up, wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, and gave him a flat stare. Do you need something? My directness seemed to throw him off for a second, but he quickly recovered his arrogance. Not at all. You just looked so pathetic over here by yourself. I thought I'd offer you a drink. He plucked a glass of red wine from a passing waiter's tray and held it out to me. This is an 82 Lafite. I'm guessing you've never had a sip of anything like it in your life, have you? I didn't take the glass. I just looked at him. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Blake blinked. What? I spent 3 years trying to win Isabella's affection and failed. You show up once, and she tosses me aside like yesterday's garbage. You must feel like you've won. My voice was quiet, but my words were a needle, puncturing his inflated ego. His face darkened, but he forced a sneer. So what if I have? Izzy has always loved me. You were just a placeholder, a leech who married into money. A leech. I smiled, a cold, sharp thing. I slowly rose to my feet. I was a good half-foot taller than him, and I looked down at him with disdain. Tell me, Blake, how does a leech get a table at the Apex? How does a leech afford a $10,000 breakfast? And how does a leech have a $3 million Pagani Zonda are waiting for him downstairs? Each question was a slap in the face. The color drained from his cheeks, his expression shifting from smug to shocked to horrified. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't form a single word. He knew everything I said was true. Membership at the Apex, a limited edition hypercar. These were things even a spoiled trust fund kid like him couldn't easily obtain. Beside him, Isabella was frozen, staring at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. She couldn't comprehend how the man who was doing her laundry yesterday had transformed overnight into someone completely out of her league. The gap in knowledge is the most impenetrable wall in the world. I savored their stunned expressions, a playful smile touching my lips. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? You were so full of yourself a minute ago. I picked up the glass of 82 Lafite from the table and swirled it gently. Then, as everyone watched in shock, I calmly poured the entire glass of dark red wine over Blake's perfectly coiffed, greasy hair. The wine streamed down his face, dripping onto his expensive Versace suit. He was a pathetic, sticky mess. You poured a drink on me, he sputtered, finally snapping out of his shock. He trembled with rage and swung a clumsy fist at me. I caught his wrist with one hand and squeezed. Art, he let out a pained shriek and dropped to his knees. Is this all you've got? And you have the nerve to run your mouth at me? I let go, shoving him aside like a piece of trash. The entire dining room was silent. Every patron was staring, dumbfounded. I picked up my napkin, slowly wiped my hands, and turned my gaze to Isabella. Her face was pale, her lips parted, but no sound came out. Vance, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Keep your dog on a leash. Before he gets himself put down. Done with the conversation, I turned to leave. As I passed her, I paused, leaned in, and whispered so only she could hear. By the way, I forgot to tell you. The Hudson Yards Gateway project? It's mine now. Isabella's body went rigid. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with sheer, unadulterated horror. I gave her a small, cold smile, then walked out of the dining room without another look, leaving her in the wreckage. Isabella, this is only the beginning. I'm going to make you watch as everything you hold dear crumbles to dust in my hands. Chapter 4. I was behind the wheel of the outrageous Pagani Zonda R, tearing down the FDR drive. The wind roared past, a symphony of long-lost freedom. My phone buzzed. It was Kingsley. Sir, the delegation from Vance Industries has arrived. They are waiting for you in the main conference room. Good. I'm on my way. I pulled up to the curb in front of the Aura Capital building. Aura Capital was an investment firm I had started on a whim 3 years ago to pass the time, leaving Kingsley to manage it. In my absence, it had become the largest venture capital firm in the city, managing a portfolio worth over $100 billion. And I was its sole, silent owner. I walked into the lobby. The receptionist saw me and immediately stood, bowing her head. Good morning, Mr. Cole. I nodded and headed straight for the private elevator. When I pushed open the doors to the top-floor conference room, I found Isabella and her father, Robert Vance, the chairman of Vance Industries, sitting stiffly at the long table. They were flanked by several of their top executives. Every face in the room was etched with anxiety. The moment I walked in, they all fell silent and stared. Robert Vance, in particular, looked as if he'd seen a ghost. He pointed a shaking finger at me, unable to speak. What are you doing here? I smiled, walked to the head of the table, and took my seat, casually crossing one leg over the other. Why shouldn't I be here? This is my company. Your company? Robert looked at me in utter disbelief. Aura Capital is yours. Who else's would it be? I shot back. The blood drained from Robert Vance's face. He slumped back in his chair, looking as if he'd aged a decade in a single second. Isabella just stared at me, her eyes a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Shock, rage, defiance, and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. Ethan, what the hell are you trying to do? She asked, her voice tight with fury. I'm not trying to do anything. I took a file from Kingsley and tossed it onto the center of the table. Vance Industries no longer has the capital to continue with the Gateway project. I'm giving you 2 options. 1. I acquire your stake in the project for 50 cents on the dollar. 2. You declare bankruptcy, and Aura Capital takes over completely. My voice was calm, but my words landed like a bomb. This is predatory. It's robbery, one of the Vance executives yelled, slamming his hand on the table. Kingsley gave a subtle nod. 2 of my security guards entered the room, flanked the executive, and escorted him out. The room fell so silent you could hear a pin drop. I looked at Robert Vance, my tone flat. Mr. Vance, I'm not negotiating. I'm informing you of your reality. Your funding for the Gateway project is gone. The banks have already denied your loan applications. Without me, you're finished. I'm offering you a lifeline. You should be thanking me. Robert's lips trembled, but he couldn't speak. He knew I was right. The Gateway project was the future of his company, their last great hope. They had leveraged everything they had to secure it, sinking deep into debt. And now, halfway through, their primary investor had mysteriously pulled out, grinding the entire project to a halt. If they couldn't find a new source of funding immediately, Vance Industries would collapse. What? Isabella's eyes were red. She locked her gaze on me, her voice trembling. Ethan, we were married for 3 years. Even if my family didn't make you rich, we gave you a roof over your head, food to eat. Why would you do this to us? A roof over my head? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, you did. You gave me food and shelter, and in return, I got 3 years of humiliation and contempt. Isabella, I want you to ask yourself, in all those 3 years, did you ever once treat me like a human being? In your eyes, I was nothing but a worthless freeloader, a servant you could order around and insult at will. At your reunion, when Blake Harding humiliated me, you defended him. When I fought back, you were willing to throw $100 million at me just to get rid of me for him. So tell me, what right do you have to question me now? My words were daggers, and each one found its mark. Her face grew paler, and her body began to tremble. She wanted to refute me, but she couldn't. Everything I said was the undeniable truth. I'll give you 24 hours to think about it, I said, standing up and straightening my suit jacket. I expect your decision by this time tomorrow. Otherwise, you'll have to face the consequences. I turned to leave, not bothering to look at them again. At the door, however, I paused and glanced back at the shattered look on Isabella's face. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, that investor who pulled out, that was my doing too. I gave her a devilish smile. Then, as I watched the last bit of hope drain from her eyes, I walked out of the room. Chapter 5, I returned to my office and stood before the panoramic window, the forest of skyscrapers sprawling out before me. I lit a cigar, took a long drag, and slowly exhaled, watching the smoke curl and dissipate into the air. My mind drifted back 3 years. I had come to this city under the terms of family arrangement, hiding my identity, searching for something as naive as true love. Isabella's grandfather had been an old friend of my own grandfather. His dying wish was for me to marry his granddaughter, Isabella, and take care of her for the rest of her life. I agreed. I thought my sincerity could eventually win her over. I was wrong. In Isabella's eyes, I was nothing more than a stain on her life, an inconvenient piece of trash. She treated me with a disdain that never wavered. She never allowed me to meet her friends, never took me to any important events. We lived under the same roof, but we were colder than strangers. For 3 years, I cooked for her, cared for her, and shielded her from any minor inconvenience. I thought that even a stone would have been warmed by my efforts. But her heart was colder than stone, harder than ice. It wasn't until Blake Harding reappeared that I finally understood. It wasn't that she was incapable of love. It was just that the person she loved wasn't me. Fine. If she didn't want what I had to offer, I would take it all back. From now on, Ethan Cole lives for himself. Sir, Kingsley's voice broke through my thoughts as he entered the office. There's been a development with Vance Industries. Oh, I raised an eyebrow. Ms. Vance just called me. She said she would like to speak with you privately. Privately? I laughed and stubbed out my cigar. Does she really think she's in a position to make demands? Tell her if she wants to talk, she can come to my office herself. Yes, sir. Kingsley bowed and left. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the live stock market data. Vance Industries was in a free fall. This was all my work. Since yesterday, I had directed Kingsley to use the full force of Aura Capital to short sell their stock into oblivion. Simultaneously, I bribed a few of their senior executives to leak damaging information to the press. The 1-2 punch had vaporized nearly $3 billion of their market cap in a single day. For a company already on the brink, it was a death blow. I was doing this to show Isabella and everyone else a simple truth. If Ethan Cole wants you gone, you won't last the night. Before long, there was a soft knock on my office door. Come in. Isabella entered. She had changed out of her power suit and was wearing a simple, pale dress. Her face was devoid of makeup, and she looked exhausted. This was the first time I had ever seen her look so human. Usually, she carried herself like a queen, radiating an aura that kept everyone at a distance. Have a seat, I said, gesturing to the sofa across from my desk. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching me. Ethan, what will it take for you to leave my family alone? Her voice was tired and raspy. Leave you alone? I replied, as if it were the most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. Isabella, you seem to have misunderstood the situation. You're here to beg me, not the other way around. I admit it, I was wrong about you. I misjudged you completely. Her eyes were red, and her voice held a note of pleading. I am sorry, okay. I'll do anything you want, just please stop this. Anything. I stood up and walked slowly toward her. She instinctively backed away until her back hit the cold, hard wall. There was nowhere left to run. I reached out and tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet my gaze. Her eyes were filled with fear and humiliation. What if I said, I whispered, leaning in close to her ear, that what I want is you? Her body went rigid. The color drained from her face, leaving it ashen. Chapter 6. Isabella left looking humiliated and defeated. I watched her go, but I felt no surge of victory. Instead, a strange emptiness settled over me. I thought seeing her beg would bring me satisfaction, but my heart felt as still and dead as a frozen lake. Perhaps the moment I walked out of that house, the woman I thought I knew died for me. Sir, shall I have my men? Take care of Blake Harding. Kingsley's voice came from behind me. I turned to see a flicker of cold ruthlessness in his eyes. I knew that with a single nod, Blake Harding would disappear from the face of the earth tonight. But I shook my head. No, it's more interesting to let him live than to let him die. For a man like Blake, a quick death would be a mercy. I wanted him to watch as everything he relied on, everything he took for granted, turned to dust. I wanted to see him fall from his ivory tower and land in the gutter, to be mocked and scorned by the world. That was a far more fitting punishment. What's the situation at Vance Industries? I asked. Robert Vance can't take the pressure. He just held an emergency board meeting. They're preparing to accept our acquisition offer, Kingsley reported. Excellent, I nodded. Tell them I've changed my mind. From 50 cents on the dollar, we're dropping it to 30. And I want Isabella Vance to sign the contract in person. Sir, if I may, isn't that too? Kingsley hesitated. Too cruel. I finished for him. Kingsley, you must remember, mercy to your enemies is cruelty to yourself. The moment the Vance family chose to humiliate me, they sealed their fate. I don't just want their company. I want their dignity. I wanted Isabella to be the one to sign away her father's life's work for a humiliatingly low price. I wanted her to live with that regret and pain for the rest of her life. Kingsley said no more, simply bowing his head. Yes, sir. I'll make the call. That evening, Robert Vance suffered a massive stroke and was rushed to the hospital. With no one at the helm, Vance Industries descended into chaos. As the sole heir, Isabella had no choice but to step up and take control. And she had no choice but to accept all of my conditions. The signing ceremony took place the next day in Aura Capital's main conference room. Isabella arrived in a severe black suit, her face pale and drawn. She moved like a marionette, mechanically signing her name on document after document. As the pen made its final stroke, the tears she had been holding back finally fell. She cried. The Ice Queen, who had always looked down on me from her throne, was finally weeping before me. But it was too late. I took the signed contract, didn't even give her a second glance, and turned to leave. Ethan, she called out suddenly. I stopped but didn't turn around. What? Her voice was filled with despair and confusion. Why did it have to be me? Why did you have to do it this way? Because, I said over my shoulder, It pleases me. I walked out, leaving her alone to sob in the empty, silent room. Chapter 7 Acquiring Vance Industries was just the first step of my revenge. Next on my list was Blake Harding and his family. The Harding family was a prominent name in the city, their fortune built on real estate. For years, they had profited handsomely from their partnership with the Vances. As the sole heir, Blake had always acted as if he owned the world. It was time for him to learn a lesson about the food chain. I had Kingsley leverage the Cole family's global network to systematically dismantle the Harding empire. We cut off their supply chains, poached their clients, and bribed their key employees. In less than a week, their cash flow dried up completely. Several of their major construction projects ground to a halt. Mobs of angry homebuyers began protesting outside their corporate headquarters, demanding refunds. The Harding Corporation's stock plummeted, pushing them to the brink of bankruptcy. Blake's father, Harrison Harding, was frantic. He called in every favor he had, but everywhere he turned, doors were slammed in his face. The so-called friends who had toasted his success now wouldn't even take his calls. He finally realized he had crossed someone he shouldn't have. He and Blake showed up at the Aura Capitol building bearing extravagant gifts, hoping to see me, but security turned them away at the door. This went on for 3 days. On the 4th day, I finally granted them an audience. The moment Harrison Harding saw me in my office, he fell to his knees with a loud thud. "Mr. Cole, I was a blind old fool. My family offended you, I know, but please, I'm begging you, have mercy. Spare us," he cried, knocking his head against the floor until his forehead was bruised and bleeding. Behind him, Blake had lost all of his previous arrogance. His face was ashen, and he was trembling like a cornered animal. I sat back in my leather chair, looking down on them, a cruel smile playing on my lips. "Spare you? When your son publicly humiliated me at that reunion, did he think of sparing me? When he hired thugs to run my car off the road, did he think of sparing me? When he had me kidnapped, did he think of sparing me?" Each question was a hammer blow to Harrison's heart. He whipped his head around to stare at Blake in disbelief. You worthless brat. You did those things." He was shaking with rage. He scrambled to his feet and slapped Blake hard across the face. "I'll kill you, you arrogant little fool." Blake was stunned, clutching his cheek, too scared to speak. I watched their pathetic display with amusement. "All right, that's enough. Stop the theatrics." I waved a dismissive hand. "Harrison, I'll give you one chance. Within 3 days, I want your son gone from this city. Permanently. And I want 50% of the Harding Corporation shares. If you do this, your family might survive. If you don't, you can prepare for ruin." Harrison's face contorted. Half his company, it was like asking him to cut out his own heart. But he knew he was in no position to bargain. I agree," he forced out through gritted teeth. "Good," I said with a satisfied nod. "Now take your worthless son and get out of my sight." Harrison Harding looked like a man granted a pardon from the gallows. He scrambled to pull Blake up from the floor, and they practically crawled out of my office. Chapter 8 Blake was gone. His own father shipped him off that very night to some godforsaken country in Africa with no chance of ever returning. The Harding Corporation, true to their word, transferred 50% of their shares to Aura Capital, no questions asked. And just like that, the city's two most prominent families, the Vances and the Hardings, were either dismantled or crippled. And I, Ethan Cole, the man they once called a worthless parasite, had become the most feared and powerful figure in the city. People treated me with a mixture of reverence and terror. The feeling of absolute control was intoxicating. But for some reason, I felt an unsettling emptiness in my chest. Perhaps it was because my revenge was complete and I had lost my purpose. Or perhaps it was because, at the top, there was no one to share the victory with. I started frequenting the city's most decadent nightclubs and parties, trying to numb the emptiness with alcohol and noise. I was never short of beautiful women. They flocked to me like moths to a flame, all of them wanting the same thing, my money and my power. I knew it, and I played along, buying them cars and apartments and whatever else they wanted, as long as they kept me entertained. But my heart remained unmoved, a dead sea, until one night, in a dive bar, I saw her again. Isabella. She had lost weight. She looked gaunt, exhausted. The proud ice queen I once knew was now working as a shot girl to make ends meet. She was wearing a cheap, revealing uniform and heavy makeup, weaving through the drunken crowd with a fake smile plastered on her face, pushing trays of liquor on sleazy patrons. I sat in a dark corner booth and just watched her. I watched as a greasy middle-aged man cornered her and forced her to drink. I watched as a group of lowlifes pawed at her and whispered crude things in her ear. I watched as she forced a smile and bowed her head to accept a few $100s in tips. A storm of emotions brewed inside me. Satisfaction, pity, and something else, something I couldn't name. Finally, she saw me. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and her body went rigid. The smile on her face froze and then vanished. She instinctively tried to flee, but one of my bodyguards stepped into her path, blocking her escape. Ipikonal Hill. She hesitated, then walked toward my table with heavy, reluctant steps. Mr. Cole. She kept her head down, afraid to look at me, her voice barely a whisper. What's the matter? Don't you recognize me? I took a sip of my whiskey, a smirk on my face. The great Isabella Vance, reduced to selling shots in a place like this? Did you already burn through all the money Daddy left you? My words were knives, and they plunged deep into her heart. Her face went deathly white, and she swayed on her feet. My father, he's still in the hospital. He needs money for an operation. Her voice cracked. Oh, is that so? I pulled a thick wad of cash from my wallet and tossed it on the table. Have a drink with me, and all of this is yours. She flinched, then looked up at me, her eyes filled with disbelief. They swam with humiliation and conflict. But in the end, she picked up the glass of whiskey on the table and drank it in one go. Is that all, Mr. Cole? Not nearly enough. I poured her another. Again. She clenched her jaw and downed the second glass. One glass, two, three. She kept drinking until she was a complete mess, slurring her words, before she finally collapsed onto the table, unconscious. I stared at her passed-out form, a wave of irritation washing over me. I motioned for the bar manager. Pointing at the cash on the table, I said coldly, "This should be enough to buy her for the night, right?" The manager bowed obsequiously. "Yes, of course, Mr. Cole. As you wish." I scooped her up into my arms and walked out of the bar, ignoring the stares of the other patrons. I took her back to the presidential suite at the Apex and dropped her onto the soft, massive bed. Looking at her face, her brow furrowed in distress, even in sleep, a sudden, dangerous impulse seized me. I leaned down, my lips moving toward hers. Chapter 9. My lips stopped, a mere inch from hers. The smell of cheap perfume and stale liquor hit me, and my stomach churned. The desire vanished, replaced by a wave of disgust. I recoiled, stumbling back from the bed. What the hell am I doing? Pitying this woman? Wanting her? I'm losing my mind. I stared down at her unconscious form, no longer seeing a person, but an object of my past humiliation. 3 years of being treated like dirt flooded my memory. She threw me away for Blake Harding without a second thought. She tried to buy my silence, my absence, for $100 million, telling me to get out and never come back. Why should she get to rest peacefully? Why does she still have the power to affect me? A dark, venomous idea began to take root in my mind. I pulled out my phone and dialed Kingsley. "Sir, find out what Isabella Vance's problem is," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. Right away. Less than 10 minutes later, he called back. "Sir, I have the information. Robert Vance has end-stage renal failure and requires a kidney transplant. The surgery and subsequent care will cost at least $2 million. Ms. Vance has sold her assets, but she's still short. $2 million. I laughed, a hollow, chilling sound in the empty suite. How unfortunate for her. There's one other thing, sir. I've confirmed that Blake Harding has secretly returned to the country. My brow furrowed. What? He has made contact with a foreign mercenary group, the Black Serpents. Their target appears to be you. Me? I laughed again, this time with genuine amusement. He wants to have me killed? The fool. I hung up and looked back at Isabella. A perfect, cruel plan began to form in my mind. I walked to the bed and traced her pale cheek with a cold finger. Isabella, you need money, don't you? I'll give it to you. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. You will pay a price. The next day, Isabella woke to a splitting headache. She opened her eyes to an unfamiliar, opulent room. She shot upright, realizing her shot girl uniform had been replaced with a silk nightgown. Panicked, she checked herself, relieved to find no signs of assault. "You're awake." I was sitting in an armchair across the room, sipping a cup of coffee, watching her. "Ethan." She looked at me, as if I were the devil himself, and instinctively shrank away. "Relax. I didn't touch you." I set my cup down, walked over to the bed, and tossed a document in front of her. "Read this." Her hands trembled as she picked it up. The words on the cover page burned her eyes. "Prenuptial agreement." What is this?" "It's simple." I stood over her like a judge passing sentence. "You're going to marry me. I'll give you the $2 million to save your father's life. In return, I guarantee that everything the Vance family lost, you'll get back tenfold." She stared at me in disbelief, as if I were speaking another language. "Why?" "Because I require a wife. A Mrs. Cole," I said dismissively. "And you, Isabella, are the most suitable candidate. We already know each other's worst sides, don't we?" She bit her lip, saying nothing. I could see the war raging within her. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, but her father's life hung in the balance. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her eyes red. "Because I'm Ethan Cole." I took a cashier's check from my jacket and placed it on the bed beside her. "Sign the agreement, and this check for $2 million is yours. You can use it to save your father. Or you can refuse and watch him die in that hospital bed." My words were the final blow, shattering her resolve. She looked from the check to my face, her eyes filled with despair. After a long, agonizing silence, she picked up the pen and signed her name. A single tear fell onto the page, smudging the ink. I took the agreement and pushed the check toward her. "Congratulations, Ms. Vance. As of now, you are once again Mrs. Cole." I gripped her chin, forcing her to look at me. "Remember," I said, my voice low and menacing, "this is a transaction. You're gaining far more than you are giving up. So wipe that miserable look off your face and learn to smile. Because in 3 days, we're having the most extravagant wedding this city has ever seen. I want everyone to know that you, Isabella Vance, belong to me, and no one will ever take you from me again. Especially not you, Blake Harding." Chapter 10. The news that Isabella Vance and I were getting remarried hit the city's elite society like a bombshell. Nobody could understand why I would take back my ex-wife, the woman who had publicly discarded me. Some whispered it was for love. Others, more astutely, guessed it was for revenge. But no amount of gossip could stop what was coming. I booked a private island for the ceremony and poured over $100 million into creating a wedding that was the stuff of legends. Flowers, flown in from all over the world, carpeted the path to the chapel. The world's top designer created a one-of-a-kind gown for Isabella. I invited the most powerful people from every corner of the globe to witness our love. I wanted this wedding to be an untouchable fantasy, and I wanted it to be Blake Harding's death warrant. On the day of the wedding, the sun was bright, the sea breeze gentle. I stood at the altar in a custom white tuxedo, waiting for my bride. When Isabella appeared, wearing a gown encrusted with thousands of diamonds, walking down the aisle on the arm of a man I'd hired to play her father, the entire chapel gasped. She was breathtaking, an ethereal vision, but there was no joy on her face. Her eyes were empty, vacant. She was a beautiful puppet, and I was pulling the strings. I knew she was acting, and so was I. We were two professionals, playing the part of a loving couple on the world's most elaborate stage. We exchanged rings and recited our vows before the officiant. As I said the words, "I do," I felt a burning, hateful stare locked on me from the back of the crowd. It was Blake. He made it. He was disguised as a waiter, but his eyes were those of a rabid wolf. I raised my champagne glass in his direction and offered him a triumphant smile. Halfway through the reception, I excused myself to the private lounge backstage. I just sat down when the door opened. Blake stepped in and locked it behind him. He pulled a black pistol from his jacket and aimed it at me. "You're going to die, Cole," he snarled, his eyes bloodshot, his face twisted into a mask of pure madness. With that, I leaned back on the sofa, not even bothering to look concerned. "Blake, are you really that naive? Did you honestly think you and your handful of mercenaries could kill me?" What do you mean?" he stammered. "I mean your so-called black serpents have already been sent to meet their maker." As soon as the words left my mouth, the lounge door was kicked off its hinges. Kingsley entered, followed by dozens of my own heavily armed security team. They surrounded Blake in a tight circle, weapons raised. The color drained from Blake's face. The gun slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. He knew he had lost, utterly and completely. No, impossible. He collapsed to the ground, muttering to himself. My plan was perfect, perfect. I walked over to him and pressed my foot onto his face, grinding it into the expensive carpet. Blake, you will never understand. You and I, we don't even live in the same universe. To me, your perfect plan was a child's game. Pathetic and laughable. I lifted my foot. Your biggest mistake was coming after what's mine. I looked at Kingsley. Take him away. Clean this up. Yes, sir. 2 guards dragged Blake out like a sack of garbage. I knew that what awaited him would be far worse than a simple death. With the trash taken care of, I straightened my tuxedo and returned to the party. The celebration was in full swing, alive with music and laughter. No one had any idea slaughter had just taken place backstage. I got a glass of champagne and walked over to Isabella, wrapping my arm around her waist. What are you thinking about, my love? I asked, placing a soft kiss on her forehead. Her body tensed. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a complex mix of fear and confusion. Ethan, who are you really? Me? I smiled, leaning in close so only she could hear my whisper. I am your husband, and I am your master, for the rest of your life. Then, before she could react, I swept her up into my arms and carried her toward our new beginning, a gilded cage built just for 2. The night was still young. Our story was just getting started.